So the education system is basically structured in such a way where it builds compliance. Like when you think of someone is a good student in school, what do you think of? Someone who follows the rules, right? They come in when they're supposed to come in, they leave when they're supposed to leave, they get dismissed by the teacher, not the bell, whatever it is. They do all their homework, all that kind of stuff. They do what they're told. It's compliance. It's a compliance model. And it has been. This isn't like unknown. Like, we know that that's how the school system was built.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a very special guest today, Reusch. We had to discuss how to abbreviate your first name and also how to pronounce your last name before we came on today, just to make sure so I don't sound like an idiot. You're a high school social studies teacher in LA, and you've been doing quite a bit of online content as well, trying to get people to learn how to think, I guess, is a good way to put that.
Yeah, critical thinking is my big thing. And then being a social studies teacher I'm going to my 17th year in the classroom. And it's shocking how many people don't understand basics of the Constitution, basics of our system, history, like none of it. So I look at people in my field as we are failing, and we're seeing the results of that out in the world.
Yeah, I've got a 14-year-old, almost 15 now stepkid, and he doesn't know what the Holocaust is. Like, he's never heard of that before, and he's going to be a freshman in high school this year. Is that typical? It seems weird to me.
Yeah, I mean, it technically, like, well, every state's different, but technically, like, world history isn't until 10th grade. So that's like where they get it formally. And then, yeah, I mean, I guess it just depends, like, what movies come out and things like that. Like, I don't know what Holocaust movies have come out in recent, Jojo Rabbit maybe or something like that. But yeah, I guess it's not showing up much on TikTok and whatever, like, 8th, 9th graders are doing a lot. But I think it's actually not that uncommon.
Really? Yeah, no, you're right about that, because I don't remember who it was, but there's a study published sometime in the middle of last year that said only like 25% of people under 25 know what the Holocaust was or something, or can explain what happened there. I mean, that seems, I don't think that's really a critical thinking issue. It just seems like maybe we've moved on from that as part of and that's kind of weird, right? Because fascism got very popular in the 1920s and 30s and has popped up a couple more times since then. It seems like something we should be aware of.
Yeah, you know what's even crazier though, Dan, is the Soviet experiment, Stalinism. Most adults go to Starbucks and ask them, the details of the gulags and stuff like that. They have no idea. So the Holocaust is covered in a lot of curriculum, state standards and stuff like that. But Stalinism, Maoist China, isn't covered really at all, which again is, tinfoil hat I wear all the time, is I think an element of why everyone gets called a Nazi and we declare Nazism as bad and everything Holocaust, but then you don't hear much about the negatives of the extreme on, like, I guess, like the left-right spectrum. If you want to say like the Nazism is the extreme right, the extreme order, then where does the extreme, progressivism head? Kids, that's not even taught. Like Holocaust, your stepkid's going to get it, but he's not going to get anything about Stalinism, most likely.
Right. Yeah, and that's certainly a problem, because maybe it's not as sexy because they didn't round up people and put them into camps or target people in the way that Nazism did, but like controlling food supplies and things like that, and doing it in such a way for Mao, deaths upwards towards 50, 60 million, for Stalin, like 28 million, something like that. Quite a bit more damaging than just outright slaughter of people, right? I mean, both in rate and total number stats. So it seems like, and I think it's super nefarious too, because it's that ideology that comes to you, and its explanation is it has the best intentions for you. You just have to trust me. You know what I mean? And that's something that you hear a lot in politics.
Yeah, and Nazism has that racial element,
yeah,
which we all know racism is bad. Yeah, we know that now. So when Nazism adds that racial component to it, that's like an easier thing, I think, for kids to grab onto than then yeah, like the policies of looking for equity and all that kind of stuff that Lenin came in and was kind of pushing for. I think it's just an easier sell to say like it's racism, it's anti-Semitism than it is, the other way. But it's really a problem. It's a problem because you can ask a progressive person, what is considered too far progressive? And a lot of them don't have a good answer for that. Like, where do you draw the line? I'm all about lines in my class. Like, where do you draw the line here and there? And I say, like, where would you say is too far? Where you're like, hey, AOC, back off, hold on, pump the brakes. What is that line? And I've asked that question to a lot of very progressive people, and they're like, no, if it's in the name of equity, it's a name of, doing good, then there is no line.
Right.
Kind of stuff.
Well, I think the answer is obvious if you you didn't attach the names and the names of the ideologies to it, people I think would more or less fall into the same belief, which is that once it starts infringing on people's personal liberty, now you've got a problem, right? Although people define personal liberty quite differently depending on the circumstance. These are good problem statements. I mean, it's I think it's kind of carried over from the feudalist age where like the church controlled access to God because all the Bibles were in Latin and only wealthy people or people that worked at the church spoke Latin, right? So you had to go there to get that. And then just illiteracy in general during feudalist Europe, what was a weapon that wardens used against common folk to keep them from, figuring out too much about what's going on. But now in the information age, that's impossible. So I guess maybe you have to shift to that, like to obfuscate the realities of some of these situations, right? So people can't get a full grasp on it. Maybe that's the difference.
Exactly what's happening. It's like, yeah, like when the printing press came out, it's like, this is a real threat to our power because we control what gets read and what gets distributed. And it's like, not anymore. And that was really disrupting. I think that's exactly what's happening with the internet is like if a press secretary gets up, and I don't care, I'm really heterodox. Like I'm pretty bipartisan. Like I don't care if it's Trump or it's Biden, but like when their spin doctor, their press secretary gets up and says things that to be not true based on your like looking at the world, then it doesn't hold up. And then the memers come in and they just smash it. And I think it's good. I think transparency is really good. I think it's a necessity for this country to thrive. And I think that the scramble you're seeing from Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell is like, we don't control the narrative anymore. This is dangerous for us.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's certainly like it. I mean, it is a very patrician attitude, right? To assume that you can solve other people's problems and they can't. Like you're not smart. I believe some Democratic lawmakers have said this in the last year. Like you're just not smart enough to understand what we're doing here. Was the general idea. Yeah. Which is, that's not one. It's not unique to Democrats versus Republicans, and it's certainly not unique to America versus other systems of government historically. That kind of stuff's been going on forever. But we had a guest on last week or maybe the week before. I don't remember what it was, but he intimated that to replace the ignorance of illiteracy or social illiteracy, even when people did learn how to read, that the powers that be are just flooding people with so much information and disinformation and misinformation and just info to kind of like create a paralysis by analysis situation. You know what I mean? Where people are so consumed trying to figure out what's going on that they're like, you know what? I don't know I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to go watch the Kardashians, you know what I mean? And mind my own business, which, minding your own business is a good idea in theory, but I think it was it Plato that said if you leave the governing of your country to other people, then you're guaranteed to be governed by your inferiors or something like that. I believe it's something like that. So it's, and it's the premise of this show. I think that you're not going to vote your way to freedom and liberty. It doesn't work like that. It's something that has to be taken by right and then maintained regularly. You know, that's what Thomas Jefferson meant when he said that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. I don't think he meant we need to go to war every 15 years. What he meant was blood, sweat, and tears. That's been for 400 or 500 years an analogy for hard work and commitment, right? It's not about like fighting and partisanship and all that shit. It's about the expectation. If you want a good government, then you have to be a good citizen, right? A good and involved citizen. And I wonder from your perspective, I know it's got to be challenging. I mean, you live in LA, which is not a great place these days. But what do you see in high school regarding critical thinking, and how are you addressing that issue?
It's a real problem. I mean, I actually had to leave the public school system just because I was getting into too many just altercations with my administration and stuff like that, because I wanted to teach the way I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach things that I felt were important, and I was very held to standardized tests and stuff like that. So I found a religious private school that basically brought me in and just said, do your thing. So I wrote a civics class all about being a good citizen, what that even means, how do we build a better society, stuff like that. I wrote it, got it UC approved, and I teach that now. So the education system is basically structured in such a way where it builds compliance. Like when you think of someone is a good student in school, what do you think of? Someone who follows the rules, right? They come in when they're supposed to come in, they leave when they're supposed to leave, they get dismissed by the teacher, not the bell, whatever it is. They do all their homework, all that kind of stuff. They do what they're told. It's compliance. It's a compliance model. And it has been. This isn't like unknown. Like we know that that's how the school system was built. But little kids, I have little kids, like they're very curious. They ask a lot of questions. They're very, trying to analyze like what is going on, what is this world that I'm in, and throughout the system of education, you exchange your curiosity and your imagination for compliance because you're told this narrative that you have to get these good grades. If you screw up in one class and you go from an A to an A-, that's going to affect your GPA, then you won't get into the good college and you don't get a good job. And we know that's not true. Adults know that's not true. How many successful people do you know that didn't go to college or didn't get good grades? A lot of them, maybe the majority of them. But that takes away kids' willingness to fail. It takes away kids' ability to think. Like it's basically like this, like an obstacle course. I mean, American Ninja Warrior or something like that. Like kids got really good at jumping through hoops, but if you said now design an obstacle course, they just break down. I teach some really smart kids, and they get great grades and stuff. But if you ask them to think of problems or come up, generate real questions, they struggle with that. They're like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And I think that's the biggest problem that I'm seeing with a lot of the education system and the way that it's structured.
Sure. Yeah. It's so you exchange your curiosity for compliance in order to get good grades and get into a good college. It's social pressures for expectations. Right. And then I think there's a good parallel there and how that continues into adulthood, where we, as a society, have exchanged the pursuit and maintenance of liberty for compliance because it's easier, and we want to meet those social standards as well, keeping up with the Joneses. I mean, but you can. It's almost like Soma, right? And Brave New World. It's something to control you, to make sure that you don't get out of hand. And I understand it in theory. Corporal punishment and corporal rules are effective at governing large bodies, but it solves a problem that may not necessarily be a problem, which is to say, our expectation is that there's one unified body maybe to govern all of these people. So we have to use these things that are tools for governing that many people. Well, why? Why isn't governing less people at a time a better solution? I mean, that's kind of the idea of federalism and reducing power to the states and stuff, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, that's why I go into detail about what the federalist system is. Well, how this country was established is that we are tiny little communities, little governments, started as colonies and then became these states that that they are going to run the way that they are, and they all are going to be different. They're little laboratories too. So when Colorado was like, hey, we're going to do recreational marijuana, everyone's sitting back like, ooh, what's going to happen? Oh, it turned out okay. All right, then we'll do it too. So everyone can kind of do their thing with an overall blanket of the Constitution saying, these are the things that the government can't do. These are the limitations and stuff like that. These are all the freedoms that are, given to you, or not given to you, I'm sorry, just like, granted to you just by being alive. So people have lost that Federalist idea. Like the Department of Education, I have devoted my life to education. Like, I think that good education, K through 12, high school education, can solve a lot of our problems. And I don't think we need a Department of Education on the federal level. That's not the point. The danger is when we go back in history and say like, well, that's what led to slavery and segregation and stuff. True. But those were defeated using the Constitution and the way that that's interpreted. And that's more nuanced, I think, that we can discuss the nuance of, well, what is considered, freedom of expression or, all that kind of stuff. We can work that out, maybe on the federal level to some degree, but to think that everything needs to be top down from Washington, D.C. is absurd. And it's very different. It's very different than what our founding fathers had in mind and what got us to thrive to build this country.
Yeah. I mean, so the backstop, I guess, of the Constitution, the general idea is that if something is wrong enough that we can marshal 2/3 of our states to add an amendment to the Constitution. We did it with slavery. We did it with women and, well, just the right to vote in general for anybody, not necessarily just for women, but certainly that. And it gets interesting, I mean, like this, it's not just one thing that ever is the culprit, you know what I mean? And what I would call societal decay. It's a lot of little things or maybe some big things mixed in, but certainly one of them is the public education system. We've completely failed there. I mean, so think about the language we're using there is that not just in public education, but at the front end of most people's professional careers as well, including university and things like that. And as they're moving into the professional world, we're still generating compliance. Now, maybe it's the result of having to use corporal punishment, you know what I mean, and governing large bodies, and we don't have the time or temerity perhaps to govern at a lower level and teach at a lower level. But there also seems to be this very nefarious output, which is that we're just training people to be obedient workers and not challenge the status quo. That to me is a big, whether it's happening on purpose or not, that's a big fucking problem.
It's huge when, we were wearing masks. Like, I think they might even have a mask mandate now here in LA. Like, it's crazy. But I was at the mall when I was like, shopping for something for my wife, and there was like scented candles and I had to wear a mask. So I pulled down the mask and I was breathing, and they're like, no, you can't do that. I was like, it's a scented candle. I want to smell what it's like before I give it to my wife. And like, no, you can't. And I was like, why? They're like, oh, I'm not allowed to, I have to regulate that. So I said, let me talk to your manager. So I went up the chain. Manager was like, I hear you, but the security here. So I went to the security. I like worked my way up the chain, and it was basically just like pointing the fingers up to like, well, Gavin Newsom said so. So that's it. So it's the compliance. Like, what does that look like in real time? People are acting in ways that they are told to do and not thinking about like, does this make any sense whatsoever? People are just complying. I think masks, like whatever you think about masks, but like, you should at least think about it. Like, you should listen to a bunch of different doctors and stuff like that about it, not just listen to a politician that tells you it. I mean, the way the Constitution is structured, I go over this in my class, is not you are allowed to do this stuff. It's the government can't do that stuff. So the way I explain it to my students is like, there's a difference between, hey, mom and dad, I want to go to this party on Saturday night. Can I go? And they say, yes, you can go. Versus, hey, mom and dad, I'm going to a party on Saturday night. You can't tell me I can't. And they go, all right, well, I can't. Like, you still go to the party regardless, but the framing of it is very different. And that's what people don't seem to understand about the Constitution, is they think that like the government gives you the right to say whatever you want to say, freedom of speech, or the right to protect yourself with a firearm or something like that. It's like, no. The way that the Constitution is written, look at the words of it. It says the government can't infringe on this. The government can't stop you. And I think once you have that mindset, might be the results might be the same, as I said, but the framing matters a lot.
Yeah, because I tell people this a lot about it's like I ask people these in-depth questions to get them to explain exactly what they're thinking, because for the same reason that a math teacher says, show me your work, it's not to give you unnecessary superfluous work to do, it's to identify what a problem in the process, right? Like if I can figure out where you went wrong, I can correct that really easily. But having to unpack all of this stuff over time is extremely difficult. I wonder, how do you, in the classroom, and so we have a lot of, people with children who listen to the show, but people who are leaders, people who are teachers, but also we have younger people that reach out to us that are still in high school or still in university. How do you challenge that kind of passive groupthink that's intrinsically linked to the idea of success in America in the classroom? And how do you instruct your teenagers, especially, on how to process this kind of social landscape where the reward is kind of walled off behind compliance, and do so and make them free thinkers without becoming like contrarians or edgelords or any of that stupid? Because you can go too far in that where you're just like, no. It's like that Larry David commercial that's out right now where he just says that no new invention. It shows him through history with inventions like the wheel or fire. It's like, that'll never work or whatever. You don't want to be a contrarian. That's just, it's so exhausting to everybody. So how do you handle that?
It's nothing new. It's the Socratic method. I mean, I think I ask a lot of questions, and I encourage a lot of my students to break out of whatever their echo chambers are. I taught in East LA. It was like a 0% white school. Kids were 17 years old, living in Los Angeles, never been to the beach. And I was like, guys, you got to break out. You got to go out. You got to expand your horizons a little bit. And then now I'm at like a wealthy private school on the West Side, and they never go into the hood. It's like, we are so isolated. And I use social media a lot. I use Instagram. And one of the things that I use it for, which I think is the way it should be used, is to connect with people that are very different than yourself. So I ask a lot of questions. They have a strong belief. I just keep asking questions. And then I do dive into like, well, how many people that you have this strong opinion about have you actually had interactions with? Like on an even playing field, like an actual interaction with. I mean, that's why I started my podcast. It's like, I've never had like an in-depth conversation with a trans person before. So I'll start a podcast that's all about viewpoint diversity, and I've had on like 7 or 8 different trans people. Some of them are like MAGA hat wearing, some of them are like blue haired activists. And it's like, oh, wow, you learn a lot about this nuance. So it's an uncomfortable thing because these kids are going in there with like strong stances. I know what's right, and my parents have told me what's right. Media's told me what's right, and it could be right or left, whatever on the political spectrum. And I just constantly challenge that. I give all kinds of assignments about seeking disconfirmation. What is your hypothesis? Just like science, you're talking about math class, just like science class. You have a hypothesis that I drop this pen, it's going to fall because of gravity. Keep testing it. Try to prove it wrong. Because with the internet, you can always find confirmation bias. You can always find some website to say that you're right, but try to prove yourself wrong. And if you can't, then you really struck some gold. And if you can, then you go, ooh, wow, I guess I was wrong. And then embracing failure in my class is the last one I would say, like, is it's okay to get it wrong. I get stuff wrong all the time. What's amazing is if your ego is not connected to having the right answers, but your ego is connected to getting to the right answers. So you're wrong. It's like, oh, tell me how I'm wrong. Sweet. Because that's going to feed my ego, because I'm always looking to get better and better ideas, as opposed to I'm the smartest one in the room. So those are some of the ways that I try to bring it out in my students. And it's disrupting for them. It really is. It's like frustrating, because they're like, man, I knew so much more before your class, even though it wasn't accurate. Like I felt a lot more confident in my beliefs. But yeah, that's education.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's Epictetus, right? You have to be willing to be thought foolish to improve. That's some 2,000-year-old wisdom for all of us. Yeah, that's a really good approach, and it's interesting the stuff that you're talking about, the methodologies you use for these kids who are, by the time you're in high school, I feel like you're pretty rooted into some belief system because all of the people around you have been people that you love and respect and depend on, have been telling you these things for years. And also, there's the other part, there's the incentive part where I get to do more of what I want more comfortably without interference if I stay on this belief system path, whatever it happens to be, right? I think maybe the idea that there's a reward to believing a certain thing is very polluting, right? To the Socratic method. Yeah. Like and I'm not entirely sure how to handle that or how to coach that out of people because, it usually goes the people who have very strongly held beliefs. Like I've said this a lot of times, no one will fight harder to preserve a lie than somebody who's wasted their lives believing it. There's something about that becoming intrinsic to your identity where it's very painful. I've never seen anybody that's that far into it. I've never seen a debate or argument convince them. It's usually experiential things that convince them, right? So like the marriage equality thing. People were super anti-gay marriage for a long time for some reason. I never understood it, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of celebrities started coming out, and then regular people started to realize like, oh, my friends and family, some of them are gay. And they're like, I've known them already. They're a normal person, so it's not that big a deal. Okay, cool. This is not a big deal. You know what I mean? It was more experiential, but no debate. Yeah. There was no debate you could have had in 1995 that would convince people who consider themselves Republican to support marriage equality. Like that never would have happened. You know what I mean? So I wonder how we do that. How do we take the theory of like teaching and Socratic method and apply that to experiential things, especially for kids that are like high school, middle school and high school are really important. And it's unfortunate this is true, but you're almost preparing them to fight some battles if they do go to university because they're basically trying to lobotomize everybody that comes through there these days. So I wonder what strategies might be effective in experiential stuff. I like your idea of telling kids not to just sit in their own neighborhoods. That's a really good idea. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if there's more. Yeah. Like, what else can we do there?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the Socratic method. I've had educators, like influential educators, tell me the Socratic method is toxic and stuff like that. Like it's wild how certain things are just you can't question. You mentioned identity too. Like I want kids to question how they identify. One of the interesting things I've done like 100 podcasts with past several years. I do like one every once in a while with all these different people is how you identify really matters. My wife was vegan for a couple of years, and it wasn't for like animal rights. It wasn't for anything. It wasn't for health, really. It was just for simplicity. So if you said, hey, let me give you some information about veganism, about how it actually, decimates, small animal populations or environments or whatever, it's unhealthy for these races, she'd be like, interesting, cool. But if her name was like Vegan Girl 26 on Instagram and Twitter, that's her identity. And then when that gets challenged, it's like, your brain thinks it's actually being attacked, like the psychological backfire effect. So I think what we have to do is reframe these young people. They have like that, like how they identify and stuff. And some of that's getting warped because of it's a hyper focus on immutable characteristics and things like that. But I think that they're still young enough that you can break that apart and let them know that it's okay to identify with other things. It doesn't have to just be your race or gender or political affiliation or stuff like that. But another thing is courage. And I think courage is going to come from, there's different kinds of courage, I guess. Because people say like, wow, Will, you're really courageous for talking about this stuff on your Instagram. It's like, nah, no. That's not the way I would define courage. But just the idea that you'll be okay. I think that it's like bravery and courage. You have to kind of be scared to be brave, right? Like if you're a fireman and you just go like, I love the heat, I love it, it's awesome, but house is on fire, get out of my way, I'm going in. I don't know if that's this. It's amazing, but I don't know if that would be brave. I think brave is like there's the dragon and there's a threat there, but beyond the dragon is the princess or the gold or whatever. It's the thing that you want, the thing you desire, and you got to get through that dragon even though it's scary. You know, like I think that's something I want to try and instill in young people is this idea that you can, you know, be courageous. You can get to the things, and this is all old stuff. Like you said, this is old philosophical stuff, but kids don't get that enough. They don't get the encouragement to follow that process.
Yeah,
I think, and that's something that I try to elicit as well. Like, you'll be okay if you fail. Who has a lot of confidence? Because young men say stuff like, "Man, girls like guys with a lot of confidence." It's like, well, who has confidence? Like all the guys who get the girls. It's like, yeah, but what is confidence really? It's not that you're not gonna fall. It's that you'll fall and be okay. You'll fall and you'll get back up, and you get that from falling a lot. Skateboarders are great examples. They fall over and over and over again, and they know how to fall and they get back up. And I think applying that to the way your mind works and saying it's okay if I'm wrong, it's okay to shift my views and things like that, I think is a good approach.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so there's an inherent element of discomfort to the ideas of courage and bravery, right? I mean, it's something that maybe the fact that people are more reserved and less likely to buck social norms, particularly when they're oppressive, is that they never develop that sense of being okay with discomfort, whether it happens to be, whether it's fear or physical discomfort or social discomfort or whatever. Like I like to think about these things because I want to identify root causes, because those are the only things that can really be effectively treated. You know what I mean? We can't trying to treat downstream effects in sociology is that you may as well not even fucking bother with that. Like, there's no point in trying to do that.
Who knows?
So there's got to be a bigger push, and I'm talking to parents of young kids, especially right now, but also, you know, if you're a kid in middle school or high school right now, you know, that's your opportunity to be a leader. And also, you know, it's a good test environment. Like, the stakes are relatively low still. Like taking stands for things, which, you know, by the way, when there's social compliance levers involved, kids do take stands for things all the time, right? If there's virtue signaling involved in it, they'll do that and make it part of their identity. I'm just asking you to take that one step further. And when everybody's, you know, looking left, maybe look right. Or if everybody's doing one thing, you don't necessarily have to. You don't necessarily have to disagree, but at least ask if what we're doing is right. You know what I mean? And why? Like, tell me what we're doing. Tell me why you think it's right. You know what I mean? I think that those are reasonable questions for anybody of any age to ask.
Yeah. Just like tap into that curiosity. Yeah, there was a kid at my school who was upset because he was like, yeah, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so said that I was a psychopath for lowering my mask. And I was like, well, why don't you ask them questions about, you know, because I guess the teacher had them like repeat, COVID is not over, COVID is not over, or something crazy. And I was like, why don't you ask them for specific details of what COVID being over looks like? What would the rates be? What would this be? Like, ask them, like, because what happens is young people too, like they say these like rhetorical questions, like, how could you possibly think that? And what I always say is like, turn that into an actual question. Like, you're curious why this teacher would act this way. You're curious why they would have you do this stuff. So tap into that and just ask them. And what happens is the teachers get very upset, or the people who you ask these questions to get very upset. You get told the Socratic method is dangerous or toxic or whatever it is. But yeah, the fear of pushing back is going back to that compliance thing. There's a great book by John Haidt and Greg Lukianoff called The Coddling of the American Mind.
Oh yeah.
It's excellent. And it's like, it's how these kids are they're not given the free reign to just like work out disputes among themselves and all that kind of stuff. So they become unfamiliar with discomfort, just as you were saying. So it could be physical discomfort. I mean, I have kids like, it's freezing in here. It's 67. You know, it's so hot in here. It's 73. I was like, you guys are out of your minds. Like, this is not good. It's not going to serve you well, because you can't handle discomfort, and life is going to be it's going to throw you a lot of curveballs. You're going to get very, very uncomfortable. How are you going to deal with that? You know, and for people who are in like these culture war things, a lot of teachers that I kind of like try to like represent, they say like, I'm just so scared that I'm going to be accused of being a racist, or I'm going to get canceled or something like that. Like that's only scary until it happens a few times. Like falling down on your bike or whatever, or when you're water skiing, only is scary until you do it a few times and you just brush yourself off so you get back up. I've been called every name in the book, and I just don't care anymore. It's like it's lost its meaning. So I think that helping kids to be uncomfortable, physical discomfort. I was listening to Ryan Holiday. I think he was talking on some podcast. He was talking about how he's writing a book and it gets really uncomfortable. And he's like, oh, I know this feeling. This is the feeling I have in the middle of a hard run. It's almost the same feeling. And if you can overcome discomfort in a physical sense, maybe you can apply that to a mental sense. But our kids today are not getting a lot of physical discomfort. They're not getting a lot of mental discomfort. And that's crucial. It's crucial to getting through this properly.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely what you're describing is every selection process for special operations or anything that exists, right? So the idea of the Hell Week, for example, whether it's in BUDS or the 21-day selection for Special Forces Assessment Selection, or any of these other ones, RIP, RASP, and the Ranger community. The Hell Week part, or whatever it is, however long it is for them, that part of it, it's not to see what you can do physically, right? It's to push you beyond your physical limits, to see how you will handle that mentally, right? That's the entire purpose of that. It's like standing on a bed of nails, or sitting in a sauna and then jumping into an ice bath. These are all the same kind of general idea, right? Like it's the things that we've learned to do in relative safety and comfort at our own homes or at a spa or something like that. There are approximations, but the general idea is the same, right? It's if I can put myself in extreme physical discomfort and learn to mentally overcome that, and then I seek out social or mental discomfort somewhere else and apply that same methodology, now I've learned something, right? And it's the interesting thing about that is that it's not like learning a subject where I might have to keep notes or bullet points to remind myself of the things I've learned, or go research it again sometime. Not to say that it's not a muscle that needs to be continually trained, because it can atrophy. But once you learn how to overcome the mental stress portion, then you know how to do it. Like you never unlearn that. It just doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? So we're not talking about, I know people see these as daunting tasks. Like, oh, I can't do that. That's like, Tim Kennedy's an amazing human being. I can't do what he does. There's a lot of truth in that statement, right? Of course you can't do what he does. He's fucking Captain America. But the part that he figured out about perseverance and living with discomfort, you can do, every single human being can do that. There's no one that can stop. As a matter of fact, that's one of the more empowering parts. It's very interesting to me. And I think it's one of the things that's really, really important. So you talk about connecting your ego to getting the right answers and not to being the author of them, teaching courage and stuff like that. I think this is one of the things that people see as a daunting task, but actually it's extremely beneficial, because not only are the benefits of the action itself extremely good and helpful in pretty much everything you'll ever do, but the fact that is a reality means that you have all the power. Like, we live in a big society where people feel disillusioned and disenfranchised and powerless to control their own lives. But the reality is you have all of the control over your life, right? Is if you can exercise your mind like that and learn to thrive in discomfort.
Yeah, and what's cool is teaching a class of whatever 25 students or whatever is they're very different. So to one kid, if you say like go out and run a mile, it's very uncomfortable for them. But they can sit down and just crack open a book and just read straight through. And then another kid might be like, the hard thing for you is to sit down and read a book in silence. So just getting them to challenge that. And it's different for everybody. Some people really embrace the idea of just like ice baths and that kind of like torturous, like, you know, hill sprints and all that kind of stuff. But if you tell them to sit down and meditate, they just can't, you know, or whatever it is. So it's what you have to find what challenges you, because it's going to be a different thing for everybody. So I try to like cater that to my students and push them to do, you know, I have 3 kids. I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 11-month-old. Our family motto is I can do hard things. So before we drop them off every day at school and everything, it's like, what's the Reusch family motto? I can do hard things. Because what happens is they go down to, why aren't you doing this, buddy? It's hard. Well, what's the family motto? So I'm always trying to challenge my students and my own kids and myself to do these things that I kind of don't want to do, but I know that would be good for me. And it's just not done nearly enough in my field. Like, it's really cool for you to invite me on here, man, because there's not a lot of teachers that I think are taking this approach. It's unfortunate. I just saw one of the biggest teacher conventions at this big like picture wall, and it said, do what you love to do. And that's the message that they're going to send to their kids. It's like, no, I love sitting by the pool drinking beer. Am I just going to do that? Is that my career? Like, no, that's not, like they say, like, you know, whatever you love to do, turn that into your job. Well, I love to do that. That's not a job. I flip that around. When I give career advice, I teach 11th and 12th graders. The career advice I give is find the thing that you love working hard at, not the thing you love to do. Because that could be drugs. Drugs make you feel good. But find the thing you love working hard at. So that grind, what grind do you really embrace? Because there's something in that then that's gold, because you'll outwork your competition if you just love it. And I know people who love crunching numbers and love being an accountant. It doesn't make sense to me, but they will outwork the people who are an accountant just for the money all day because they love it. They love finding the little half a percentage point to save their clients or something like that.
Well,
so I think that's
what you're describing is purpose, right? I mean, that's how you find what your purpose is going to be. And look, it's not like a lot of people get turned off when you get kind of woo-woo with some of these subjects, but you know, purpose is something that's a big part of human life, and without it, I guess people call it now the God-shaped hole. After, like, we're kind of in a post-religious society in a lot of ways, even though there's quite a few religious people still out there, but society itself is kind of in a post-religious setting now, and that's going to get replaced by something, right? It's going to get replaced by some pursuit, because that's what being a human being is all about, is pursuing things. And it doesn't have to be some higher calling or something supernatural or anything like that. Like, your purpose is going to be something that happened, something about the development of your brain and your surroundings. So those two, a physical and a social element, and then what you enjoyed as a child maybe, or whatever it is, some problem solving. It's going to be some problem that you enjoy solving. And that is going to be your purpose in life. It doesn't mean that it was assigned by somebody, or that if you don't believe in God, this isn't to challenge you to believe in something outside of yourself even. This is just how nature works. You know what I mean? Hunter-gatherers to planters to warriors to educators, scientists, all throughout human history, people have had purpose. And now I feel like most people don't. Most people are just trying to doggy paddle to stay above water at this point. And some of it is due to societal challenges. Some of it is due to, you know, excuse me, in my opinion, nanny states and oppressive governments. But a lot of it is due to just the complacency that we've trained into people over time, and that we've allowed ourselves to fall into as well, right? Like, you're not gonna find a whole lot of purpose bitching about politics on Twitter. And if you do, that's a big problem, because you're not, that's to me is a net negative. Like, if there are certainly problems that people need to talk about, and I appreciate the people who, in a just and righteous way, point out the flaws in these systems. I've tried to do that myself, but at some point, make some effort towards solving them and not just bitch about it all the time, right? So that's what we're trying to do here. And I see a lot of people like you trying to do that in the education sphere. Yourself, Corey DeAngelis, Bogosian with the University of Austin, along with Barry Weiss and those people, like they're doing a lot of good work. And it has nothing to do with right versus left politics. It's about our most valuable resource, our human beings, and how we're treating them from the lowest possible level all the way up to prepare them for life. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's like one of the biggest problems in the country right now is the absence of purpose, and that we're teaching our kids that their purpose is entirely wrapped up in their identity, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the religious container or whatever it is. I mean, Peter Boghossian, a lot of the people, because I'm in this like anti-woke space to some degree, are atheists. But even they're recognizing that we have that. So, so one of the things that but if you abandon that, then morality gets kind of tricky. One of the things that I do with my students is I say, are you a good person? And they might say yes or no. It's like, well, first you have to define what it is to be a person then, if you're going to be good at it. And I'd say, I have a water bottle here. Is this a good water bottle? Yeah. Is it a good pillow? No. Like, it serves a certain purpose. It's bad at doing the job of a pillow, but it's good at being a container for a liquid. Like, so if you're going to be good at being a person, then you have to define what a person is. And then what does that mean? What is your goal here? And that's where you get to your purpose of like, what are you here for? What do you do well, and how can you contribute, and what can you be used for society? And it's going to be diverse, because if we get into a massive war, I don't want Elon Musk kicking indoors. I want him being Iron Man making cool rockets. We don't want to, we all have something to contribute to this society. And I think that's really an important element of understanding, your role of we focus so long on your rights as an American, justifiably, because rights were denied in a lot of ways. But we have done that and shifted the focus away from your responsibilities and your duties. And you have responsibilities and duties to your country, to your community, to your family, to the people that you interact with. What are those, and are you going to uphold those? And that's something that I try and promote a lot, because I don't care what you're good at and what you love to do, but how are you going to use that to fulfill some sort of purpose, to do some sort of greater good for you, your community, your family, and then you kind of grow out to the world at large. That seems like a pretty good aim for young people to start looking at, because they don't even have an aim. Kids are really upset that they don't get into a college. And I go, well, why did you want to go to that college? And they don't have an idea. No idea. It's like, did you want to study under that professor? No. So you're disappointed about not getting something that you didn't know why you wanted to get it. Like these kids are lost. And so they grab onto identity, or they grab onto, they just look at that flip right. I don't know. I just finance, I guess, because money's cool. Like, they don't know. And I think that guiding them as early as possible, I mean, maybe not like preschool, but like, in high school, like, I think is a good time to get them to start thinking about, what are you going to contribute? How are you going to get your life fulfilled? How are you going to, make things better? Yeah. And what does that even mean, even better?
Right. Yeah. That's good. Those are good questions. I mean, to your last point, if regardless if you're a young person or older person, if your purpose is entirely wrapped up in your identity, you will always fall into tribalism by definition. Like, the terms may change, like what you're tribalistic about might change, but you will always be tribalistic if your purpose is aligned solely with your identity. That can't be the case. You can't allow yourself to do that. I mean, that's absolute poison. To your other point, it's funny you mentioned rights and responsibilities, because that's the definition of citizen. When I mean, and I don't mean that in a roundabout way. I mean, that's literally in every definition of citizen, is the rights and obligations or rights and responsibilities of a person that is either born into or naturalized to a state, right? And I do like to say a lot that we've spent quite a bit of time since it's been going on probably for the entirety of American history, but particularly since in this particular time period for the last 25 years or so, we've been talking a lot about our rights and very little about our responsibilities to those rights. You know what I mean? It's like we're trying to we're trying to live in a house that we refuse to build or maintain. And how does that work? You know, I mean, it doesn't. So the idea of citizenship, I think, where there is the bifurcation between rights and responsibilities, has major implications for both the state and the citizen. And once we eschewed our responsibilities as citizens, in my opinion, that's when we became subjects instead of citizens, right? Like we kind of jettisoned whatever obligation we may have to take part in the social contract, whether it be workforce or just society in general or politics. We guaranteed ourselves to be subjects because now these people are not leaders from among us, but rulers over us. And that's something that we really tried to avoid in the early days of this country. From my perspective,
it's the whole thing we're structured on.
That's
our whole structure.
It was kind of the whole point. You'd think that we would pay more attention to that, but from my perspective, or from our perspective rather, it's a lot easier to reduce the idea of citizenship to what you're owed, I guess. But the fatality of that line of thinking is what you mentioned before, which is that people have come to believe that the rights are granted by the state instead of guaranteed by them, right? Those are very big differences. A guarantee of something is something that exists, and rightfully so, and this is an agent of protection, not an agent of granting rights. Like the government doesn't have the authority to grant me anything. They exist because I allow them to exist, right? That's the way you should think about that. But the only I guess responsible and ethical way that you can hold that opinion is if you're also doing your share. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that we've kind of lost with the young crowd, for sure. Like it used to be for us, Boy Scouts, leave stuff better than what you found it. Put more in than you take out, which is one of our principles. And then you mentioned again, the other thing was, what is it about your, like what during the process of discovering what your purpose is going to be, a big element of that is the work output that I do, whether it be building a family or building a business or work or charity or whatever it is. How is it connected to helping other people and helping my country? So that's one of our principles as well, which is I'll do something every day to help my country. My countrymen are all men. And I've gotten some pushback on that. Like, well, how can I do something every single day? Like, all right, cool. You can hold the door for somebody every day. Like, there's something you can do every day. You can challenge somebody who's being rude to somebody else. But the point is to get people in the habit of seeking out both discomfort and seeking out solutions, right? So you see somebody that looks like they're upset that day for some reason. Go ask them why. You know what I mean? I don't know how many unnecessary deaths, whether it be suicide or fucking some kind of mass shooting, that could have been prevented by one person talking to another person. And that event did not happen because one person was uncomfortable. That's a fucking shame, to be honest. Yeah. And it's something, again, it sounds like we look back on those things and we feel really negatively about it. And, I guess there's room for some guilt in there, but you really need to turn that into purpose, right? So the idea is that somebody could have done something about that, or, well, I'm somebody. I can do something about it from this point forward every single day, right?
Yeah. There's so much there. I mean, a lot of like the critical theory stuff that's going into schools it's about victimization. It's about eliciting anger, and it's not giving solutions for making it better. That's cruel to me. You can't tell young people that they're victims and things are so terrible, and then not give them a pathway for how to try and make it better. And that's exactly what's happening. It goes along with this like do what you love concept that's all over the place too. Is well, what about cleaning up the park? Like I bring my kids sometimes, we clean up the park. So we go to the park, we just bring the garbage bags and we clean it up. And we say like, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? My boy's like, nobody. It's like, yeah, like doing that, you know, community service is required in a lot of schools, but there's so many ways to BS that. I just had a recent graduate from a Hollywood high school on my podcast. I was talking to him and he's like, oh, you can just say that you attended a rally and you get your full community service hours. So like there's all, so it's not really about, again, it's not really about the service. It's about just like checking a box, just like compliance. Let's do this. All right. As opposed to actually contributing something. I mean, Service Year Alliance, people who do armed forces. I know like Israel and a bunch of other countries have like mandatory service. You know, there's something to that. I'm not saying we need mandatory service. I like having volunteer military, but there's something to the importance and the value of getting people to buy into this, because we were just given this unbelievable blessing of this country. And if you were born here like I was, you just take it for granted. My wife is an immigrant though. She came here when she was 8 years old and they were struggling from the Philippines, like 10 people in a one-bedroom apartment type of thing. And her patriotism is so strong because she knows something else. And my in-laws were under, you know, Marcos, who was like a real dictator, and Duterte now. Like I have family members who are like, yeah, a bunch of teenagers were just shot in the street for staying out after curfew. And once you see that, then you go, oh, I should appreciate where I'm at a little bit. You hear these immigration stories of people who've come here just struggling, can I please just get to America? But then there are people who are here who just take it for granted because you're just handed the keys to a Ferrari. You don't appreciate that Ferrari. If you were digging fence posts for 10 years to save up for that Ferrari, you're going to wash and wax it and take good care of it and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot now is we're just, these young people are just given tremendous blessing of being in this country. And then they just look at all the negatives of it, which there are negatives, look at all the negatives of it, and then just like kind of take it for granted, like this is the way it is everywhere. No, it's not. It's definitely not. You should travel more to see how crazy it is in other places, and maybe you appreciate it more. But I think that buy-in is really important.
Yeah, for sure. Compulsory service doesn't work for the reasons that your Hollywood high school graduate outlined. People either the people that you really need to convince to do this stuff are either going to do it half-assed, or they'll find a way to check the box or whatever, right? And I think a better method.
What about Israel, though? What are your thoughts on that? In Israel, it seems to work pretty well, right?
I think it works pretty. I think
they're always at threat.
Yeah, I think we're sampling on the dependent variable in that one because there's such a deep national pride already that the compulsory service and the compliance with it is almost assured because of it. You know what I mean? Like I don't know that it would work here in the U.S.
There's suicide bombings all the time. It's like, I see rockets flying over my head. You're a little bit more encouraged to participate. Where here we have this sense of security. That makes sense. Yeah.
I think a better method for, especially for, I mean, that's a single country with not nearly as many people as we have, obviously. And we're in a federalist system. So it's much larger, a much broader ideas, you know what I mean? Like people have different ideas about that sort of thing. But the Peace Corps exists, right? So I still think compulsory service, I just don't think it works in open societies like this. I think a better method, and it's one that worked up until the 1960s really, which is setting the expectation that all people serve and serve each other, and allowing natural social pressure and shame to kind of run its course. Like, for example, in 1850, if your neighbor needed help, you helped them, right? And if you didn't, everybody knew you were a piece of shit, right? Yeah. And I think that's a much more effective and organic model to do something like that. Trying to compel people to do things, like I think it removes the point where the person begins to understand why they're helping other people. You know what I mean? I think that's the most important part of it.
A culture shift?
Yeah. I think it's doing it just to do it. It is so you can check a box or be in compliance. I think it removes that element where the paradigm shift in people's brains happens, where they're like, you know, I've now seen, and I think your idea of people experiencing different cultures, right? Being exposed to how the real world is and not just in America, that's probably a better solution to that, because what's the phrase? Lessons not learned in blood are soon forgotten. You know what I mean? Which isn't to say you need to go to combat to learn a lesson, but if there's no consequences, if you don't see what real suffering looks like, then developing empathy for it is going to be, I think it's going to be difficult for people to do that.
Yeah. Well, there's a culture shift, though. I mean, the fact is that there's a lot of people now who have platforms, bigger platforms, whatever. I mean, all the way up, Joe Rogan or someone like that, like, who promotes this kind of stuff. Doing hard things and like challenging yourself and helping people and all that kind of stuff. Like, Tim Kennedy, like all these people, they're doing this. These people are putting this out there, and kind of, if it takes a culture shift, which I agree with you, I think is the ideal, it's going to take a lot of people who are influential on the culture to steer that, to model that. I mean, that's how cultures shift, is we have individuals planted around in influential spots, influencers, to promote that kind of thing. And what you're going to be up against is the other stuff, which is just do what feels good. And that they are influencers too. So that's the culture war to some degree too. That's a fringe part of the culture war, is, the responsibility element versus the just do what feels good kind of element.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the disparity between George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Washington was a Catonian, very reserved, very like virtue was the key goal in his life. And then, Jefferson was a bit more on the side of enjoying life and things like that, and just leave me alone. I mean, he was the original Republican. Like, I'm just going to do my thing. You leave me the fuck alone. I don't want this strong central government stuff. But I think we can see from, like, Jefferson was a brilliant man, but I think we can see from his failures how, and from, Washington's failures, in my opinion, and letting Alexander Hamilton run roughshod over the early part of this country. He fucked up a lot of stuff that we're still dealing with today. Yeah, financially especially. And I think the very obvious solution is that the confluence of those two ideas is what makes America great. It's the idea that we place virtue first in order to allow people to live the best possible life. You know what I mean? That's the whole thing. Yeah. It's like mom and dad. It's like dad builds the house and protects the house and hunts for food, and mom makes sure that we're all taken care of so we can actually enjoy our lives. You know what I mean? And that's why I get so irritated with the state of modern politics is completely fucked. But even in the 1950s or something, when it was a little more calm, that it started around that time to, like, when Richard Nixon started to get involved in politics in the mid-50s and stuff like that, it started to get to a point where we, instead of seeing the other side of the political spectrum as a complement to what we were doing, we started to see them as the enemy. And it's not how it works. That's not reality. It's not reality that classical liberalism and republicanism are so different that they can't coexist together. They're two very necessary parts of any free society, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wearing my Sons of Liberty shirt.
Yeah,
it's a Citizen podcast. We need them. Like, we need Texas and California. We need left and right. I mean, I've only been to one political rally like ever, and it was in 2020 for Tulsi Gabbard, and she got up and was talking about Abraham Lincoln, and a quote of his is something like, "I don't like that man. I need to know him better." But the way that I kind of frame it for my because there's a couple of ways I've explained left and right political ideology. So real quickly, one is Jordan Peterson kind of like order and chaos. So one is like the pedals moving ideas forward, and then the other one is the brakes, like, hold on, let's keep this orderly and stuff like that. And both to the extremes are very dangerous. But the way that I've kind of thought about this, because I'm always trying to think in metaphor, because there's 16-year-olds who don't give a shit about learning government, So I got to try and explain to them. So I'm like, at a club, there's a lot of people that want to get into the club. And then there's the doorman, and the doorman's like, no, not you. You, pretty girl. Yeah, come on. Like, and that's essentially what I'm seeing now with like the progressives are putting all kinds of wacky ideas out there. Some are good, some are not good. And then the conservatives are like the filter. It's like the screen, like the sift or whatever, the doorman to say like, okay, you can come in, you can't. Because that's how we got, people say like, well, progressivism is how we got the civil rights movement. No, it was both. Because within the progressive movement, there was Stokely Carmichael too.
Yeah.
There were really radical people, and they were not allowed in the club. But Martin Luther King, who said, equal rights under the 14th Amendment, okay, that you can come in the club. And we need that, because if you just open up the gates, that club now is going to be a mess. It's going to be terrible. No one's going to have a good time. And if we just shut down all progressives, then the club's empty.
Yep.
So we have to really work together. And that's why I value tremendously my friends on the left and the right, because I see it as we need both of you guys. We do need the wacky AOCs, but we also need the more like conservative, whatever, Dan Crenshaw or whoever, on the right too. Like we need both of them. What's the problem though? And I agree with you that we're fucked is they're not working together.
Yeah.
What we need is for them to sit down and talk. I see people talk all the time about Marjorie Taylor Greene, but why don't you talk to her in a public forum for 3 hours and let's work this all out. Let's work it out why I don't want you in my club. Let's actually talk about this. And that's, I think, what's not happening. This division is a perfect time for us to go, you know what? I don't like those lefties. I don't like those people on the extreme right, whatever I define that as. So let's work this out, in the battleground of ideas, and we'll get to something approximating, something good for this country. That's compromise. That's how Hamilton and Jefferson hated each other, but they had to compromise. We had to compromise to even build our, bicameral legislature and stuff like that. Like that's what's needed, and I think that's what's missing from the situation. We've always, as I said, we've always been polarized, but they've interacted more, and that started to shut down a lot more in the 90s, Newt Gingrich and stuff like that.
Yeah, the family stuff. I wonder if the division that we see now to such an extreme is and by the way, James Madison was a big part of pushing that division as well. Very, very involved in creating political, George Washington did not want political parties, and Alexander Hamilton definitely did. He wanted Federalists and Republicanism to get the fuck out of there and things like that. But I wonder if today the division is a result of people being divisive, generally speaking, or if it's a result of people being divided by political theater. You know what I mean? Like, have we been marketed? Have we been marketed to? Has division been marketed to us by political theater, or are we just tribal? I mean, I know to some degree we're tribalistic by nature, but it seems like unless somebody is instigating, people will find a way to get along because you have to, because it's inconvenient to be constantly at odds with everybody around you. Yeah. It's not even like an ethical or moral issue. It's just fucking exhausting and inconvenient to be constantly at odds with everybody.
I think it's both. I think that we do have that inherent element of tribalism. It's why we support our sports teams that we do and things like that. So this is just the biggest sports team. We turn on the news, it's all politics. So we're just bombarded with this like us versus them, left versus right. You watch Fox News, it's how terrible the Democrats are. You watch CNN, it's how terrible the Republicans are. And it's just, and the people who are running this political theater are so confident. They just know that they are right and those are wrong. And so you watch that and you go, oh, okay, I like that confidence. Like that's what makes a good salesperson, right? Someone who just is so confident. Like that's like, oh, okay, well, I'm just gonna listen to them. And then we just go, all right, we have this tribal kind of programming, and this just taps right into that. And then you would think with access to all the stuff online and stuff, we would have all these different viewpoints, but that's not the way the algorithm works.
Right.
Because when social media was created, it's like, I love model airplanes. So I click, I like model airplanes. So I get a lot of model airplane stuff. It's like, this is awesome. But when you do that with news, with politics, you get what you want. Like, I'm a capitalist. I love, free market ideas. But there's a danger when I bought this pen because I like the pen. I don't know if I should be buying my news because I like the news. Maybe there's news you should hear that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe there's news that you should hear, not necessarily want to hear. And I think that a big problem is also the media is kind of is structuring in this kind of capitalist system of giving you what you want.
Right.
And sometimes we don't. That's not good for us. What we want.
Yeah.
It's what do we need?
100%. Yeah, I agree with that. So look, here's the reality of the situation. No one's going to do that for you. The news corporations and politicians that we have in America aren't going to do that work for you. You know that if you're paying any attention, you know that now, that it's an echo chamber that's being fed to you to create some kind of result. And if you want to fight it, a lot of people have chosen to tune out and ignore it. That is not how you win this battle. You win this battle by doing 2 or 3 more layers of research on the subject than you normally would have, and then having conversations with other people like, hey, what did you get out of this? And then they respond and you say, well, I read these other 2 things and they said this. What do you think about that? And even if you don't settle right there, you've planted a seed in that person's mind and in your mind to think about this more. And at some point you're going to come to a good decision about it. If you continue to do that, I think it's really important. I'm really glad there are people out there like you that are teaching kids to do this shit. It's unfortunate that that's not the standard, right? But as much as we've liked to rag on public education over the last 10 or 20 years, it's been bad for about 100 years, or if not more, in America, especially once. I don't have time to get into it now, but it's been bad in America for a while. And it's not that we don't spend money on it, and it's not that we have incompetent people doing the teaching. It's that the standards have not been set appropriately. And that's on all of us to fix that. The good news is that we all know what the problem is, and I think we have a really good idea of what the solution is. Now it's just time to do it. So I appreciate you doing it and teaching the next generation to do the same. And I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you, man. Yeah, I mean, that's what got me into this stuff on social media and podcasting is to try and fix the education system. And I knew if I went to a college of education, I'd be just into an indoctrination camp, basically. That's not the way to do it. So I'm trying to backdoor my way through these channels, and you giving me a platform to talk about it is amazing. So sure. I appreciate you tremendously as well.
Yeah, for sure. Check out Will Reusch everywhere you can find him. Tell everybody where they can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, generally it's just my Instagram is like the platform I use. It's personal. You can kind of see that I'm a real person. So it's just my name, Will Reusch. And then I have a podcast called Cylinder Radio. Then I'll probably lean into a little bit more next year, just having conversations with people, every controversial topic you can think of. Abortion and guns and race and transgenderism, all this stuff. And we just try and get all different perspectives. It's called Cylinder Radio. The idea is it's like a circle and then it's a rectangle, but it's actually complex. So just love the complexities and nuances and disrupting people's kind of programming a little bit.
Great, man. I appreciate it. Yeah. You guys go check them out. Thank you for coming today. Thanks for listening. This has been Citizen.